got as many slides or QR codes, but I understand that I am the last before the break that we're going to have, which we're sponsoring, so we've got some decent reasons to hang around. I'll get to it. So this is really about building a growth machine and really sharing what we've seen at Singular in 2019 and give you an insight to the kind of customers that we work with and also the kind of trends that we're seeing within the industry as well. Myself, I've worked in video display, I've worked for Facebook, social, I've worked across a various different range of things, and Singular is very much focused on the data, so that's what we're going to kind of dive into today. For those of you that aren't familiar with Singular, I'll give a brief introduction and maybe not a pitch, just so you can understand why we see what we see. So we're a marketing intelligence platform. In essence, what we do for our customers is we make marketing data easier to use, more actionable. We simplify it. And we do that by collecting it, combining it with user journeys, and often giving insights needed for growth. And hopefully that dovetails into a lot of what we've heard from app developers, other experts, other channels today as well. We do that at some scale, so over 10 billion in ad spend is measured and optimized through our platform, and we're lucky enough, if you see the logos up here, is to work with the early adopters and the gaming companies, the Kings, Zingers of the world, the marketplaces of Airbnb, Lyft, etc. So as well as social media, Twitter, LinkedIn, e-commerce and Amazon. So we really get a really interesting insight into how they build teams, what technologies they employ, and what tactics they use as well. So that's a kind of a little bit about the who. The what we do and why it's prevalent is essentially we provide data infrastructure for them. And I kind of put this up as a kind of left side, right side. So as marketers, we're constantly investing, we're testing channels, and we've heard about that a lot today. There's an enormous amount of data to collect and standardize, whether it be cost, whether it be creatives, etc. And you need to combine that with business outcome, which is what did that user do? Did they register? Did they install? Did they make a purchase, for instance? So think of us as that engine in between. We are an MMP and a measurement partner for web, but we're agnostic in terms of we plug into the Googles and the other MMPs of the market as well. So a little bit about us. The reason why we want to talk about growth is we've been talking to the market, and really that's the session today, is like what we've gleaned, what the challenges are, but also how you can structure your organization to overcome them. So on the right, I think what's more prevalent about this is we interviewed over 500 marketers, but we also analyzed 1.5 billion in spend across 700 media sources, and then the resulting actions of their users. So 2020 obviously will be a challenge. First of all, data. This isn't about data explosion. I'm really talking about data collection and making it actionable within your organization. So yes, there are more people, there are more devices, there are more platforms, but there's also more ways to interact, different ad units, etc. So what we heard from marketers is, how do we collect that data? How do we combine it together? And how do we make sense of it so we can make a decision? With that becomes more ad partners, and a lot of them are here today. So there are more options, and I think one of the talks talked about more the merrier. Is like we analyzed trillions of impressions, billions of clicks, and then the resulting revenue you get. Ultimately, more partners equals scale, and we'll come back to that, but it means that you have to have a good testing methodology. With that is obviously then this data collection, and aside from GDPR, there's changes in California law, and I think a global shift on how we look at privacy concerns as well. So how do you overcome that as an organization? And we also then, looking around the room, is we have iPads, we have devices, we have mobiles, etc. Is how do you measure what users are doing, where they're registering, what that cross-platform, cross-device journey is. So to constill that down, is we then spoke with the organizations that we're working with, and this aligns with quite a lot of the content earlier today, is actually whether you're a small organization just starting out, just scaling, is getting your infrastructure right around team, tactics and technology. It helps you overcome future growth problems. So we're going to kind of go into those and hopefully give some anecdotes about how organizations have restructured themselves. So cross-functional growth teams, I think super interesting. It's less about hiring someone as a specialist. It's much more about organizational change and actually taking a data-driven approach to how you go about marketing your business. So I think we've definitely seen that in some of the talks today. I see Walt over there. We're talking about one product, but 19 countries, and the fact that that actually becomes 19 products. So how does each team take responsibility for that? And really, we talk a lot to marketers, but to grow as an organization, there are so many different stakeholders, and they're using different data sets. And I think the shift in the market is that we talk a lot about acquisition, how we acquire, where we acquire, what creative assets we can use, how we can keep iterating. Our BI teams are involved with data collection. Product managers need to retain. They need to make the product best in class. And finance wants to understand where we invest, how we're investing, how we maybe even gain investment as a company. And weaving conversations together is difficult because often these teams work in silos. So I think breaking the barriers is really important. So in the past, these teams didn't necessarily speak, mainly because they had individual goals. They were often working to their own KPIs, like a product manager on retention versus a UA team on a CAC, for instance, or a BI team just collecting data and not really knowing where it's going to end up. And very specialized, so they're very good at working in their own individual areas, but not necessarily understanding how other functions within an organization works. So what's changed? I mean, cross-functional collaboration is really how you bring organizations together. And I use LinkedIn as an example. So you get to LinkedIn sort of operates as an internal marketing resource for multiple products. It's a very well-known brand, but ultimately those products could be sales, employer, job seeker. As an organization, they really wanted to see is how are we doing incrementally, Could we do a QPR and look at our portfolio of products and how do we grow? So although we're talking about large scale, is some of the people in the room, is you'll have multiple products, et cetera, is how can you get a single source of truth as an organization? So a board member, a CEO, a CFO, a CTO can log in and understand growth. Alignment around North Star KPIs, this is much less about do I need installs, do I need retention? It's like, how do we grow the business's bottom line, and can everyone align on that data set? And I think the data-driven, utilizing smart tech is not everyone's just app first. So Airbnb, for instance, has a web product and an app product, and they broke down that barrier so they could understand the kind of cross-platform flows as well, previously siloed. And then just to finish on organizations like Lyft, used to employ search specialists, display programmatic specialists, social specialists. Again, what you want to do is employ a data-driven individual that can apply the same methodology and thinking to multiple channels and test and iterate around that as well. So I think those are the general themes that we've seen within the organization. Then it's like, how do you take those tactics to market? And I think, we talk about growth funneling. I really see growth as a loop, and how do you keep feeding that loop? And this comes into how you organize yourselves. But test, measure, and iterate is something that's continually come up today in A/B testing. We're not going to go into that, but new channels is obviously understanding scaling reach. New creatives, how does that resonate? What's the conversion rates on that? Audience strategies, how do you broaden that out? But there's lots of other data points that go into that. My bid, the budget, what time of year. There's a lot of thing that goes into that initial test. You have to then measure everything into that loop. So it's not just about, did we acquire users? Were they retained? Were they monetized? And going to sort of the North Star metrics, what was the ROAS, the ROI, the LTV of these users? And you need an underlying data set so you can all align on, I understand how much I can acquire a user for and what the predicted LTV potentially of them is. Once I've got that, I can feed back into testing. So this is all about iteration and goes back to some of the study that we did. Then you can kind of innovate on top. Souk worked from working on CPI optimization to cost per first order as they matured. Rovio looks at a portfolio of apps, the Angry Birds, more at a player level for Rovio rather than an individual level for app. Glovo on-demand services actually built technology that automates budget allocation on top of us. So once you have that, you have the ability to roll out, and I think this is where the innovation comes in. And it's proven to work. So you take the same budget. We saw advertisers that advertise on more than 5 networks increase install rate, but also they lower their CAC costs, for instance. And this is less of a reliance on social and search, and it's actually broadening out. And we just did a blog post on TikTok, which has had exponential growth at a user level, but we've seen a 75x uplift in spend in just from May that this was taken. And this is like a new audience. This is like 13 to 16-year-olds. And predominantly this spend uplift has been driven by e-commerce companies and marketplaces looking for the next audiences as they mature as well. So taking that mindset, I think, is super important. But you can't do it all in a day, right? We're a technology company, so I'm not going to talk about AI, machine learning, but ultimately you should be automating insights, right? You have a barrage of data. All individuals, I think in all organizations, we get given this data and we're meant to glean something from it so we can have some kind of like epiphany and some kind of like organizational growth. The reality is different people use data in different ways, so you want it to be actionable, and in which case if you can automate the right insights, then you can make them usable. So this is actually taken from another study. So again, about 700 marketers that we interviewed, and we were basically saying, it's like, what do you need in terms of your stack? Like, what's actually usable? So aggregated spending, with user-level data. So that's how much did I spend and what actually happened to that? Was that a good use of my time? So this goes back to testing, fail fast, and also understand where you can deliver and take the opportunity cost and scale budgets that make sense. Granularity is something I'll come on to, but publisher and creative level data. There's a war out there on the streets, whether you're a Lyft versus an Uber, whether you are a gaming customer, whether you're an on-demand. So it's not just in the app stores, it's at the impression level, it's at the publisher level, so you need to know who you're up against. And also, marketers want, automation. How do I boost ROI? Can someone tell me, and can that be delivered to my inbox? Why? Ultimately, we talk about these levers, and ultimately, this aligns back to that kind of North Star KPI of growth. Is you can get scale or you can get ROI, and at some point you have to choose what you're doing, whether your product's mature or it's learning. But each of the levers that you can see here has a direct impact. Creative refreshes can increase your scale. Whitelisting publishers can get you better ROI, but reduce your scale. So all of these things really go into the mix. What it comes down to is then, what do I understand about my bidding strategy, etc. So I think what they're in the pursuit of is like, how do I pull these levers? And obviously a lot of people are buying automation for that as well. But you need to understand how that automation works, and the devil's in the detail with the data. I kind of put this in there because I think it's prevalent, is that I often do these presentations and talk about these enterprise level customers. We work with SMBs, mid-market customers, people that are just launching, and you may be starting spending $100 a day, a few $1,000s a day. All of this is prevalent if you're launching multiple geos, multiple different products, etc. Is you may think this may be a long-term pursuit, but as you scale, you will hit these barriers incrementally, etc. So also looking at your stack is build it to be kind of future-proof as well. So when we brought that all together, we kind of asked about so what ideally does that look like, and fundamentally, technology alignment aligns with, cross-functional teams, and also looks about how you can test and measure and grow your organization. So this idea of like marketing and unifying data, it really comes into these different bubbles around the outside. And so attribution, yes, you need to measure everything. If it's cross-platform on web and mobile, and make sense of that. Analytics means that you need performance analytics, but for creatives, you need it for the BIs, for the monetization teams. It needs to be different data sets. You even need an analytics so your CFO can understand how much did we spend and what was our return on ad spend, for instance. It justifies further of investment. Audience management, how do I segment and get the next best users? Fraud, ultimately a whole topic in itself, but am I buying real users? Right? Or are they spoofed? Or are they stolen organics? And ultimately, going back to product is, am I providing best-in-class user experience? Am I retaining? And am I bringing people back into the app as well? So to try and constill that into kind of 3 tips for 2020 and the way people are going at that, empower organizations with cross-functional growth teams, focused hiring on data-driven people that can use their talents elsewhere, push them to use that. Test, measure, iterate. I know you've heard that before. Is fail fast and take opportunity cost. Invest budgets where you're seeing high return, and use technology that brings your whole organization together, and make sure that each stakeholder, if you like, is given an insight that helps the overall organization to grow as well. So I am on time, hopefully. Which leaves me with this. So thank you very much for going through that as well. Me and the team are around. Feel free to ask questions, etc. Applaud uncontrollably. Or join us for a smoothie if you've had too much coffee, which is being served in the foyer at the moment. Thanks very much.